Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. The situation is developing very quickly in Gaza in relation to the attacks that are coming from the Palestinian resistance against the genocide soldiers today, with the Al-Qassam brigades, the armed wing of Hamas, releasing the second episode of what they call the ambushes of the gates of hell that are taking place primarily so far in the south of Gaza, which is in the Rafah area, close to the Philadelphia corridor. We're going to talk about the ambush, the second ambush that's happened, that was published today by Al-Qassam brigades, its significance. It was more brutal than the previous one. What that means, an analysis about it, the situation in relation to the aid going into Gaza with the US plan and why it was rejected by Hamas. What is Israel saying? Is there a prospect of a ceasefire? We're going to talk all about that in this live stream, but we're also going to move on to Yemen and the developments with the new phase that's taking place now by Ansarullah in Yemen against Israel, with a second attack on the Ben-Gurion airport in Israel, confirming that THAAD failed again for the second time in less than a week. Alongside internal reports confirming that things are becoming more troublesome in Israel for the soldiers and more EU states boycotting Israel, then we will move on to the Indian-Pakistani developments, especially what's being used. Now there is a war on monitoring what's happening between India and Pakistan, and there is superiority to the Air Force of Pakistan and also the drones that they're using. But the more interesting part is where they're coming from. We're going to talk all about that in more details later on in this live stream. But let's begin with this here. Al-Qassam brigades, the remains of Israeli soldiers, were scattered after an Israeli force was targeted with a high explosive device in Rafah. This was called Operation Abwab al-Jahim 2, or the Gates of Hell 2, the second round of the Gates of Hell ambushes that the Palestinian resistance has been conducting against the genocide occupation forces in Gaza, in Rafah, in the area that Israel is now considering to be a buffer zone or a security zone. Now, in Israel, they had censorship. So they only said yesterday and the day before that there was an event with many casualties, a building detonated with everyone inside it, and we cannot provide any more information. Very high levels of censorship. But now the Palestinian resistance declared they had 9 soldiers being lured into a location similar to the previous ambush. Palestinian fighters go and start targeting the Israeli genocide soldiers in Gaza. Then the Israelis send their dogs to sniff around, check if there's anything suspicious. They find that everything is okay. And the genocide troops go in only for them to be trapped in a location where they have an ambush from the Palestinian fighters. It was very similar to the previous operation, but there are many messages coming from this operation by Al-Qassam brigades, especially with the fact that it has been implemented in a similar manner to which it was operated previously. So you're talking about a group of Palestinian fighters. They are waiting for Israeli soldiers in a certain location. The Israeli soldiers, they follow them and they get killed. And the problem is, well, they published the footage of them targeting the Israeli soldiers before in the same way. How can Israel fall into the same trap twice? This is something very interesting here. So if we have a look, I'll share some bits of what the Palestinian resistance published with this operation. So again, this is the location that it happened. Again, Salah ad-Din Street, and this is the operation where it happened exactly. east of Rafah. They are saying that the actual ambush began by targeting the ground floor of a location of a building that many of the genocide soldiers were hiding in with anti-material weapons, and also they targeted them with semi-automatic guns. Then, similar to the previous time, the Palestinian resistance fighters went back to the tunnel opening, and they lured the genocide soldiers to a massive ambush with many explosive devices. Then when they reached the genocide soldiers, all of the explosive devices were detonated and they were all killed and wounded. And then the Israeli helicopters came to evacuate them. This is very similar to the previous operation. The Palestinian resistance starts an operation, meaning they have freedom of movement. Then they lure them in, they get fooled, they send their dogs first, they don't sniff anything. What is the Palestinian resistance using that the Israeli dogs are not smelling exactly? What are they exploding the place with? This is something that's frustrating the Israelis, by the way. They don't know, because usually these dogs, they're trained to smell every explosive thing, like sniff anything from a very far distance. But no, they went in, they can't find anything. And then the actual soldiers go in, and all of them exploded. So they were ripped to shreds in this operation. By the way, we're not going to see images of them being like ripped to shreds or whatever, just the location. So here the Palestinian resistance monitoring them, targeting the ground floor in this area, then targeting it with Yasin 105. Of course, the genocide soldiers, they feel like, oh, okay, we know where the shooting is coming from, therefore let's send it. But the Israeli soldiers, the actual dogs, they don't sniff anything. They don't smell anything. So what happened if they can't sniff anything? The genocide soldiers, they follow them. They follow them to the location because they feel comfortable. One after the other, they start going in, just checking, because, well, according to the dogs, there was nothing dangerous. Nothing dangerous there. The genocide soldiers start going into this ambush, and it's full of explosive devices, by the way, without them knowing. Again, the dogs misled them. Are the dogs Hamas too? Their own dogs? Oh my God, our dogs are Hamas. That's what they're probably saying. What are our dogs doing? Not sniffing. And then here we go, the Palestinian fighters, that's it, game over. And it's all over and done with. Then there's, of course, like smoke coming out from the location and what have you. And Israel, after that, they sent several helicopters to evacuate the people, their genocide soldiers' bodies from the location. And again, another attack similar to the attack that happened previously, with the same tactic. You see, the funny thing is, you think if the Palestinian resistance releases footage, these imbeciles will learn something. Clearly, they're not learning. That shows you how incompetent they are and how much they're sending their own troops to die for no reason. Netanyahu is sending these people to go and die, and Israel is sending the people to go and be killed for nothing. All of these lives of these people who went to fight for Israel could have been saved if Netanyahu and his government continued to a deal. And, well, if the Israelis as well forced Netanyahu to do that too, because at the end of the day, the man, he has been getting away with all of this murder and genocide and slaughter, and the killing of Israelis too, alongside the genocide against the Palestinians, despite all of the protests that are happening in Israel. Now that shows you that something is wrong also. From the way, well, how can it be that ineffective? You're talking about the lives of our people. How can they get away with allowing him to go for that long, killing more and more Israelis? And then the sentiment is there, the people between them, some people in Israel, they know what happened exactly. They tell you, they tell us, critically wounded. No, they were actually blown to pieces. They were back in body bags. And what does Israel do? Israel goes and targets civilians again in restaurants with bread. You see that's what because you can't see the actual people who are going out and targeting them. You see how much the Palestinian resistance is more advanced than this diaper army. They know where they are. They have intelligence. They have information. They have cameras. They have everything that they need. And they're fooling them, taking them down like ducks, even not ducks, even something else, one by one. And they're falling into the same trap. Now, how is this being taken in Israel? Of course, there are people who are saying things that are similar to what I'm telling you, like Netanyahu sending these people to go and die. But at the end of the day, it's still happening. It's still going on. There's a lot of pressure coming from the United States administration. I've spoken about this in previous videos earlier on, especially with Trump and his senior figures, Witkoff, Hegseth, canceling his visit, Trump cutting ties, many reports. Regardless of what you think of that, whether it's a show or not a show, at the end of the day, we're dealing with reports because many people started to say, oh, I don't believe them. You're totally entitled not to believe them. And we know they're liars. However, it is actually happening. Trump is cutting ties with him. His Secretary of Defense is canceling a scheduled visit. And Witkoff is deliberately publishing information telling Israel that they're going to pay a heavy price. And guess what? The United States stopped helping Israel with Yemen, and we're going to get to Yemen soon. And Yemen is still striking Israel. Witkoff told him, sorry, Huckabee, staunch Zionist, the U.S. ambassador to Israel. He said, if Americans are hurt, then we can maybe do something, but not if Israelis are hurt, basically. He didn't say not if Israelis are hurt, but you can get the message. Only if there's a risk on America. There is no risk on America. What America? America, they put themselves in the picture, supporting and facilitating a genocide. Them and every other genocide supporting country. But it's not stopping. Now there's more criticism internally because it's not just happening with the United States. This is what it's very important to know. It's not just the United States, it's EU countries too. For example, there was another, apart from, there's the theme going on with Palestinian statehood recognition, stuff like that. Not to say that that's going to stop a genocide or whatever, especially with countries that still arm Israel, like Britain. But the Netherlands, the Dutch foreign minister, he is calling for a re-examination. He's calling for re-examination of the partnership agreement with Israel due to concerns of violation of humanitarian law. They were one of the biggest allies of Israel. This was reported in multiple news agencies and was also reported by Israeli media. Concerns of violations of humanitarian law. Netherlands restricts export of dual-use goods, requires individual inspection of each shipment. Now, the Netherlands was one of the first countries to stop sending parts and things to do with arms to Israel, followed by other countries too. But now they're escalating this even further. And the criticism, and this is something very significant against Israel, by the way, especially seeing as they're having tensions with the United States. Now, the United States didn't reach a level where they said we're going to have a halt or stop arming Israel. Biden, there were reports that he delayed some shipments before. Trump, nothing solid yet. Are there certain things happening that we don't know of? Maybe. But so far, it's still happening. Now, this is affecting Israel heavily. Not from Europe only, but from global countries too. And the criticism internally is increasing. It's increasing with more criticism about Israel turning its own soldiers into war criminals. I mean, this has been obvious for the ones who can see, anyone with a brain, right? With an ounce of brain and a pair of eyes. Okay, and let's also say with access to internet, if you're, a citizen of the world, that has been monitoring the genocide since the beginning. But for an IDF chief of staff to say that, and to say that repeatedly, an ex-IDF chief of staff, Bogi Ya'alon was one of the first people in Israel to call what Israel is doing ethnic cleansing. Bogi Ya'alon was considered to be right in Israel, right wing. When he came to power and when he became a top figure in the Israeli security establishment, people were worried. But now he's considered to be like a traitor. Lots of pressure was applied on him to take back some of his statements, especially after Israel started what it called at the time the general's plan in North Gaza. Do you remember when they were besieging everything, besieging the Kamal Udwan hospital, eventually imprisoning, kidnapping Kamal Hussam Abu Safiya, the manager of that hospital, after killing his son and applying so much pressure on him? He said at the time Israel is conducting ethnic cleansing in Gaza. But now he's having more statements. So he's not taking his statements back. Now he's saying it does not stop an illegal order. The chief of staff, he's criticizing the current chief of staff, saying he does not stop an illegal order, turns his soldiers into war criminals. The former chief of staff and defense minister addressed the expansion of the operation in Gaza in an interview with Ynet and attacked Zamir, who's the current IDF chief of staff, saying that he needs to stand firm and not allow war crimes under the auspices of Smotrich and Ben-Gurion. According to him, this is clearly an illegal order, and every commander and soldier must decide whether to carry it out or refuse. Or Netanyahu, he added, it's taking time. The end of the war, the end of the term. Now, these statements coming from such a senior figure who led the Israeli army and was the defense minister before in Israel, are very serious, and they are heard by the people who serve. This has a very big effect, because some of these people that Israel sends to go and fight, many of them just graduated, not fully trained even, and then sent to die as cannon fodder for a genocidal supremacist entity. Many of them, pushed into pressure, don't think too much, ignorance, brainwashing, but they will see statements like that. You will hear statements coming from the previous IDF chief of staff. They will talk to people who were in the army, and they're giving a backwind. These people are giving so much support for outright refusal. That's already ripe in Israel. It's at peak levels, more than ever before. Over 50% refusing to serve. Now, it's not stopping with Bogi Ya'alon. Amos Yadlin, right? He was the previous head of the Aman, or the Military Intelligence Directorate. He's seeing what's happening with Donald Trump and the American administration, and he's not really seeing that in a positive way. Now, mind you, some people are trying to downplay it. Some people are taking it very seriously. There was an understanding between every Israeli prime minister and every American president. It's a give and take, and you need to learn by the hint. As a matter of fact, the previous Israeli prime minister, Ehud Olmert, was blamed by many in Israel for being a yes man for George Bush at the time when they expanded their war in Lebanon, what was called the Second Lebanese War. And according to many analysts at the time, that move that came from Israel was actually a US interest to apply pressure on Iran through Lebanon. Now, that also failed. There was an inquiry at the time, and it concluded that Israel failed in the Second Lebanese War. But the leadership in Israel, it understands that the communication and the relationship between any Israeli leader and the United States president is a give and take. You can't go all out against an American president, even if you think you have a lobby and you have power and you have influence and you have whatever it is you think you have. You can't do that. Now, according to Amos Yadlin, who was, again, the previous head of the Israeli Amman, he's saying that Trump is actually pushing for a huge move and Israel is left alone with the troubles. And according to this analysis, that many share in Israel, politicians and people in the military establishment too, well, he's going to have a deal with Iran, he's going to have a deal with Saudi Arabia, he's going to have a deal with anyone else in the region, but Israel's going to be left out. Israel's going to be left out. And as a matter of fact, the other side is asking him to exclude Israel. And guess what? It's actually working. It's working because it just worked with Yemen. Yemen stopped the United States attacks. That's a victory for Yemen. Yemen managed to stop the United States from attacking them because of their consistent attacks against the US terror forces in the Red Sea, going to support a genocidal entity against a poor country trying to impose an embargo and stop a genocide for the sake of stopping a genocide, by the way. When all of the other countries are just looking and crying and, oh, aid and whatever. No, Yemen was actually doing something that was effective. Effective to a level where it dragged 5 aircraft carriers of the United States that, guess what, failed. Miserably failed. Shows you that what? Trump is having deals with other countries. It's not just a theory. He had deals. They were taken aback in Israel. They were shocked. Why? Because this whole operation started for the sake of a genocidal entity, for the sake of Israel. It was started because they were targeting Israel. They were blocking the ships that are linked to Israel, imposing a very effective embargo. And they led to the main port in south of the Israeli entity to declare bankruptcy, the port of Eilat. Israel started to try and find different routes, help from this, help from that. It did not make up for the losses. It didn't make up for the losses that Israel suffered. And guess what? Yemen is not stopping the attacks. Yemen today again targeted the Ben-Gurion airport with sirens in many parts of Israel, panic all across the country, and Israel confirming that THAAD failed again for the second time in 1 week. So, missile from Yemen triggers air raid sirens, disrupt air traffic in Israel. Israel claimed that it intercepted the missile. However, the damage was done without it landing. Look at the airport. People running, everything canceled, people running away from the beach. The missile even disrupted the people swimming. Is anyone going to sympathize? Does anyone sympathize with Yemen ruining the people going to the beach? I wonder. Now, shows you that what? Shows you that Yemen has been and still is very effective. And guess what? They're continuing to attack Israel despite the fact that they had an agreement with the United States, meaning they were excluded. Israel was excluded. Benjamin Netanyahu is isolated, and Yemen managed to isolate Netanyahu, split him from Donald Trump. through constant and effective attacks on the genocide entity and on the genocide-supporting U.S. terror forces in the Red Sea. They managed to stop that very effectively, and they are attacking Israel constantly. And guess what? They had multiple statements as well. Today, one of the people who made statements is Muhammad al-Bukhaiti. Muhammad al-Bukhaiti was a senior figure in Ansarullah. He said, guess what? We are actually continuing the attacks, and we are in a new phase. We're in a new phase of attacks against Israel. He said the air blockade is now taking another step. We're continuing to conduct these attacks, but this time without the United States participating in any sort of action against Yemen. And millions of people were out in Yemen today celebrating these successful attacks from Yemen against Israel, but also celebrating the fact that the United States is out of the picture now. That's very important, because if the United States is out of the picture, that means Yemen is at more liberty to conduct even more attacks without anyone hindering them. No one is affecting Yemen now. They're continuing these attacks, and the United States is out of the equation. There's no one to bother them. And that's it. They can't do anything about it. Now, the people were out in their millions in Yemen, and in Iran, they're monitoring the whole thing. In Iran, they are monitoring everything that's happening with Yemen, with Israel, and they're also, having digs. They're having digs at the failure of the THAAD, again, in Israel. I had read this report here. Israel's US-made THAAD fails again as Yemen targets key airport with a hypersonic missile. Now, why is the THAAD failing so miserably? This is a very important question. The United States sent the THAAD system, air defense system, to support, to bolster Israel's air defenses, yet it's proving to be ineffective. As a matter of fact, it even failed in a joint operation with Arrow 3. Why is Iran monitoring? Iran is monitoring because Yemen is using new advanced missiles with very interesting capabilities. So let's say, for example, Arrow, it's an exo-atmospheric system and also with hypersonic capabilities. It will detect things that are coming from outside of the atmosphere from really far away so that they can take them down outside of the Israeli airspace. The problem is Yemen's missiles, you know what they do? So they launch a hypersonic missile, supposed to leave the atmosphere. Some of their hypersonic missiles leave the atmosphere, right? And then when the warhead that has its own motor gets released, it starts gliding. It starts going in the atmosphere and above the atmosphere and left and right, therefore making it more difficult for the Arrow 3, which is, again, detects things above the atmosphere. It makes it more difficult to detect it and to take it down. Now, they take these routes and they start, swimming basically, or like a snake, towards Nevatim base or, any of the other targets. Arrow 3 is confused. Hold on a second. We detected a missile coming from Yemen. Where is it going? Oh, it came under the atmosphere. So they detected something, but then it disappeared, and it's moving like a snake. Motors, of course, controlling everything. And then when it arrives, it either lands in its entirety, or if it has multiple warheads, it releases them. And by that time, too late. Job is done. Iran is monitoring that very heavily. because Iran is, of course, Iran is a supporter of Yemen. And of course, despite the fact that Yemen had many advancements internally in their missile capabilities, there's undeniably Iranian support, and they're proud of their support. They're proud of their support, and also Yemen is showing them these maneuvering capabilities that they're conducting. And Iran also, they don't need to prove themselves because they already proved themselves with, especially in True Promise 2. Now, it isn't only Iran monitoring Yemen, it is the world monitoring India and Pakistan and what's happening between India and Pakistan. Now, the situation between India and Pakistan is still ongoing. It hasn't been resolved yet, but there have been significant developments and interesting reports. Number one, there's an emergency room between India and Pakistan. That emergency room is active. So both sides are talking about the escalation that's happening between them. So they haven't like cut ties completely. From a Pakistani perspective, although India wanted to end this operation, this Sindoor operation that they had immediately after it began, by saying that this was a very small attack and we did not attack any military bases of Pakistan, trying to kind of deflect or, cancel any sort of attack repercussion that might come from Pakistan. Now, Pakistan, they had a very quick response, very sharp and quick response. Now, there are very interesting things happening in the responses. Of course, firstly, there was the air battle that happened between the two countries, between the Indian Air Force and the Pakistani Air Force. Now, the Indian Air Force, it uses the French Rafales, whereas the Pakistani Air Force is using the J-10s, the same J-10s that Egypt bought recently, with slight modifications here and there. The main thing about these J-10s is the fact that they have air-to-air capabilities. Now, the fact that the J-10s are taking down the Rafales, the French Rafales, that is a very big indication about the superiority of the Chinese Air Force. And the whole world is monitoring what both sides are doing. So there was this report here in the Eurasian Times about the Chinese celebrating the success of the J-10C fighters. And there were multiple reports. Listen, some reports said they took down 2, some said they took down 1, right? But what's for sure is we've had evidence from the ground these fighter jets fell, the French fighter jets, and Pakistan confirmed that. Now, how did they take them down? Pakistan is going to have down multiple Indian fighter jets using its Chinese origin J-10C. Again, the same one that Egypt received from China too, with capabilities to take down F-16s, the same F-16s that Israel has. Armed with long-range air-to-air missiles. This is the key thing here, the long-range air-to-air missile with a longer range than the French Rafale and even the F-16. Now, the Rafale, it's a 4.5 generation fighter jets. It's a very advanced fighter jets. But this is causing a lot of problems for the French manufacturers, because some countries are now evaluating and weighing in buying the Chinese J-10C or buying the French Rafale. So by the looks of it, they're not going to be choosing the Rafale if the J-10C is taking it down. And that's giving China a boost. And that's showing a greater capability from the Chinese fighter jets. But it wasn't only the fighter jets. There was the battle of the drones. And that battle of the drones was extremely interesting. Why? Because India was using Israeli drones. Yes, you've heard that right. We have this report here in the Times of Israel. The Pakistan military said it shot 25 Israeli-made drones. Israeli-made. How are they taking them down so quickly and so effectively? Well, apart from the fact that they have good fighter jets, they have good air defense systems. So this report in Israel again confirming Pakistan armed forces said to have so far shot down 25 Israeli-made Harop drones. Debris of the Israeli-made Harop drones is being recovered from various areas in Pakistan. This is very interesting. But it wasn't just Israel sending India drones. There was another country sending Pakistan drones. And who's that country? That country is none other than Turkey. Turkey sent many of its drones to Pakistan. And the problem is that this attack was very effective. That was very problematic for India. So we had this report here in the India Express. Let me bring it to you in a sec, saying that 300 to 400 drones targeted the Indian locations from Leh to Sir Creek, says the government. MEA press conference today, a swarm of 300 to 400 drones targeted Indian locations from Leh to Sir Creek in overnight strikes, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri said, underlining that Pakistan was using civil airlines as a shield. Pakistan declared that they stopped closed their airspace. India on Friday said that Pakistan attempted drone incursions in 36 locations, 300 to 400. Pakistan also attacked a Gurdwara, they said, leading to casualties on the Indian side. Now, all of these drones were Turkish. They were Turkish drones, and according to multiple reports, both from India and from Pakistan too, they were very effective. And Turkey was the first country to call Pakistan outright directly and tell them, we have your back, we support you. And Israel was one of few countries to side with India and tell them that we support your right to self-defense. Of course, self-defense. I mean, Modi and Netanyahu are very close. And when Israel says a country has a right to self-defense, when they're just, doing all sorts of, crimes against humanity and all sorts of barbarism in Gaza, it says a lot, doesn't it? But what's really important here, what actually got my attention is the fact that you have, a battle between Israeli and Turkish drones in the Pakistani-Indian conflict, and a battle between Chinese and French manufacturing. And so far, it looks like, the Chinese, they have an advancement, taking down these French Rafales, especially due to the long-range air-to-air missiles that the J-10C is equipped with. And in the drone game, in terms of quantity and quality, Pakistan is outnumbering the attacks by a very long shot. And of course, everyone is monitoring. This will have a lot of effects, especially in relation to countries who were thinking of using something. This will give a boost to both the Chinese side and to the Turkish side too. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you in this live stream, as usual. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Thanks for everyone who participated in the chat and sent supers. In the meantime, stay blessed, take care, enjoy the rest of your weekend. I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone. Salam.